Okay, starting a minute or two early. I was just kind of waiting around, so I thought, why don't we just kind of get into it? So let me mute my computer over here because I'm watching my own stream to make sure everything's working. So today, what I would like to work on is kind of continuing to build out the responsive version of this UI and hopefully get it far enough to the point where we can kind of work on this sidebar, because I think that's going to be one of the more interesting elements that we have to kind of put together. So one thing that I thought would be cool to touch on, maybe two things before we get into it. First thing, yesterday, the creator of this tool, Polypane, reached out to me on Twitter recommending that I check this kind of custom browser app out for doing responsive web design. So I'm going to play with that today. It's pretty neat, really. Basically what it does is it gives you one giant window, and you can create as many sort of breakpoints as you want, and it shows them all at the same time, and they sort of all live update and stay synchronized with each other. So what I've done is I've created browser windows for all of the default Tailwind breakpoints. So this way, as we're working, we can actually kind of preview what it looks like across all breakpoints at the same time. So I haven't actually really used it for any real work yet, but I thought it'd be fun to sort of tinker with that today and check it out and see how it works. The other thing I wanted to touch on was yesterday I was really struggling through some stuff with getting this scrolling to work and having the right amount of padding on the edge. I was missing this padding. So I ended up coming up with a solution thanks to a couple people who chimed in with some ideas. And I kind of wanted to quickly go over the pieces that were necessary to make it work. So the first problem is that if you just use a block level display like flex, it doesn't work. So here, if I go just like flex instead of inline flex, you'll see that when I get to the end, there's no padding, right? So this doesn't really make any sense to me. I'm sure that there's a reason for it in the spec or whatever, but inline flex, you do get to have the padding. So that was one of the pieces that I had to do to kind of make that work. And for our purposes, because we only have one root element inside this parent, it doesn't really matter if we use flex or inline flex. The result is the same. So that works for us as a little tweak here. The other thing is that previously I was using a max width for each one of these. I think I was using like max width XS or something, which is like a Tailwind class size. For max width, combined with the width full utility to try and make the item stretch to fill all the space but clamp it down to a specific size. And using max width also creates a problem where you don't get the right padding, but switching to an actual fixed width does. Now the problem is the fixed width I was using, like the width from the max width utilities, doesn't exist in Tailwind as a width class. So what I ended up having to do is in my Tailwind config, I just added a new spacing value called 80. Which is 20 rem, which is the size that we were using. And then I swapped out all that max width stuff with 80, and that kind of got things working. So this should be interesting. It might be hard for us to, it's going to be harder to do some of this work than it has in the past because of the fact that we're working on a small screen resolution here. I've got my iMac kind of brought down to 1600 pixels wide for the stream, since everyone's kind of watching it on a smaller screen or in like a little embedded window. So we only have 1600 pixels to work with, and we have to jump between the editor. We have to jump between Figma and stuff like that. So there's going to be a lot more tabbing around here than there was for the previous ones where we could sort of fit everything on the same screen, but hopefully we can still get through some stuff pretty quickly and be pretty productive. Questioning, can we get access to the code? Yeah, I'm going to open source this repo today. I kind of was hesitant to do it because it's not like the finished thing, and when the course is done, of course, the code is all going to be available for everything. So I kind of wanted to keep it private until it was fully finished so that people don't get like a half crappy done version of it, but I'll just put it up on my personal GitHub instead of the Tailwind one and just kind of mark it as a work in progress thing, so that anyone who's been following the streams can at least kind of poke around if they just want to play with it and learn from it. Okay, so why don't we head over to Polypane here and kind of check things out. So I kind of think the last spot we ended up on was the filter UI here. It looks like we got a little bit of horizontal scrolling here. I wonder why that is. That's suspicious. Is it there when the window's closed? No, it's not. Let's test this out in Chrome for a second just to be certain that that's not related to Polypane. So that's okay. But when this is open, yeah, there's a little bit of scrolling. Oh, see how we have like a bottom border poking out here? We must have some sort of negative margin or something on something. Let's see. So this element has a top border and it's got a negative MX2. All right, so we need to tweak this a little bit. So instead of doing the negative MX2 on this element, I think we're going to want to do it on a parent element. So just for curiosity, okay, if we get rid of that, it kind of messes up the position of things. So if we take this one and we just like get rid of that and keep that aligned, that should be good. And then probably all we need to do is add SM negative MX2 on this one. No, that doesn't do it, eh? Let's think about this. So we got PX4. We might just need like an extra container. Or maybe we can just rework how that works a little bit. Okay, needless to say, let's pop open Polypane. We'll try and do it in here. All right, so we should be able to fit this here. Let's just head over to our search filters. All right, so this is kind of where things are messed up. So maybe what we'll do is we'll just kind of solve this problem the way I wanted to solve it originally, which is to create a div around here. We'll grab all this stuff and move it up. And what we're basically going to do is we're going to treat this as like a row. So if we say SM negative MX2, I'm curious if this is actually probably close to enough to solve that problem. Yeah, that does seem to solve it there. And then if we scroll over here, things still look good there. And I hate when scroll bars appear. Things still look good there. So that does work as a solution here. So I think we could honestly simplify this a little bit in some ways. We're doing like multiple flex containers and stuff. I think we could probably simplify this. Let's see if we just get rid of this element and this element, and we just treat this as like one grid row. We'll make these width 1/2, width 1/2. We'll make this one width full. Okay, what does that give us? Okay, so we got like some messed up padding stuff. So we'll just make this flex always, negative MX2 always. This should have PX2. Okay, so now this isn't quite right because this is half full. So we're going to want to add Flexwrap to this so that things can wrap if necessary. We're going to want to add whatever our margin top was. It was MT4. So we're going to want MT4 here, and that's good. Now on these screens, that's going to be all the way across. So we want to go back to half, or sorry, quarter, half. So then the solution here is just going to be to use width 1/4 for each one of these. SM W 1/4, and this can be SM W 1/2. And we can also do SM MT0. We'll put that right at the beginning of the SM list. All right, so this is still good. This is still good. This is still good. And now on this size is in Steve's design, we actually have we've got like 3 columns here. Now we hadn't really thought through this in tons of detail, but we thought something like this would be kind of interesting because even if it's maybe not like the ultimate UI, it's a interesting example of how to do something like a little bit more complicated with Tailwind, like jumping to sort of a nested grid sort of view. So let's get this going, and then we'll try and get the sidebar going. I think that'll kind of be a fun exercise. All right. All right, so what do we have for kind of our elements here? So we got this div, which contains all this stuff. Then we've got this div, which contains the property type stuff, and this div, which contains the amenities stuff. So do they have like a common shared wrapper? They got this form wrapper. So let's take this form, add a class to it. We'll say on, what screen size is this? Check out Polypane here. Bring the zoom down maybe. That'll help us kind of like, we're not going to be able to see things pixel perfect, but it'll at least kind of let us look at the layout. Maybe that'll be kind of a nice workflow. Yeah, this will be kind of all right, I think. Pretty cool. All right, so we want this to be display flex on, what is this, 1024's large screens. So let's do flex on large screens. Okay, so this is obviously a disaster, but that's okay. Now it looks like the button row is in this container too. So we're going to need an extra container. So let's keep the form like it is, and we'll add another div. We'll grab everything except the form container. We'll just bump that up into here. So we'll set this to display flex on large screens and above, and that should keep the button at the bottom at least. All right, one other thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to default is open to true so that anytime it refreshes because we've made a change, everything is still kind of open and working. Okay, so we got a problem with like all our checkboxes shrinking, like everything overlapping here. That's okay though, we can figure it out. So let's start by giving each one of these a fixed width. So we'll say width 1/3 to start for every single column. And we might tweak this, like we might not divide it evenly depending on how much space we need for each one, but we'll kind of start with 1/3 each. Like I could see us wanting maybe a little bit more space here. So now that we've got that set up, basically what we want to do is we want to revert back to the half full layout for these form elements. So let's just do large width 1/2, large width 1/2, and then large width full. So this actually isn't a browser plugin. This is like an app called Polypane, which someone who follows me on Twitter, it's like a new product that he's working on, I guess, and he tweeted me about it and told me to check it out. So I'm checking it out today on the stream. It's the first time I've played with it. Seems pretty cool so far though. It's nice, like you still have like Chrome DevTools and you can look at everything. It's still pretty early stages, I think, but so far it seems pretty neat. All right, so we got that layout kind of sorted. We're going to want to bring back that margin too. So let's do LG MT4. All right. Now for this stuff, we just basically want everything stacked. So here we set it to SM Flex. So basically on LG, we want to go back to block, and we'll probably get rid of the horizontal margin. And we can get rid of this SM width 1/4 thing too. So let's just grab all these and we'll do LG width full. All right, so that's a little bit closer to. Now we've got this PX2. I don't think we need that on large screens, so we can just go back to PX0 since we're stacking again. And Workcation is a completely fake app that I'm making just for this Tailwind course that I'm working on. It's kind of like an Airbnb-ish app me and Steve have been designing for the last couple of weeks trying to design something that looks really nice and also has like a lot of interesting elements in it that will help you learn a bunch of the different features in Tailwind. All right, so amenities. So if we check out the design, I think this goes to like a 2-column layout, right? Where it goes kind of like back and forth. I'm not sure the order of these is super important. I think we just need to try and get it into 2 columns. So let's just see what we can do based on the markup that we have. So we got SM, Flex. Let me look again at Steve's design. Yeah, he has them in like literal columns, which might be impossible for us to do easily. Like he has balcony, then pool, then beach, then pet friendly. Whereas we kind of need to have, because we were doing like on this breakpoint, you can see we were going balcony, pool, beach, pet friendly, kid friendly, parking, air conditioning. And then here, so we have it going left to right. I guess like one way we could restructure the markup would be so that like this is a div, this is a div. So we have 4 columns with 2 items each. And that way when we get to this layout, we could just stack the columns on top of each other. Something like that. But for now, why don't we just try doing like making each one of these its own column on this view. What? How come that's not selecting the last one there? Oh, because it's half. All right. So these are going to be LG W1/2. All right. And then air conditioning, we can just make that like W full maybe. So this isn't quite exactly the same as Steve's design in the sense that Steve's design, yeah, the order is a little bit different. But for our purposes, I think I'm actually kind of okay with it. If the order was really important, we could rethink the markup a little bit, but I think this is okay. In the design, he's got kind of a lot more space around these things, but I was there when he was building this, and he was just like quickly dragging things in the 11th hour. You want to copy the Figma file? I can paste the Figma file into the chat. Again, the Figma file is actually pretty sloppy in a lot of ways, so don't obsess over it too much. Looks like paste between my computers is not working right now. So I can't paste this into the chat because my chat is open on a completely different computer. So someone can memorize this string and and type it in. And then I'll add a link to it somewhere eventually. Sorry about that. Anyways. Yeah, so he's got a little bit more space around things. I don't think I'm going to sweat that too much. In some ways, it's actually kind of nice that it's tighter because then you don't have as much of a gap at the bottom of this chunk. But let's at least get his borders and stuff in there. So he's got a top border and then borders between. So let's figure that out. What do we have right now? We have a top border, but that's because each one of these has a top border. So really, we just need to add a left border to this one and to this one. So let's look for, see how we have border T, border gray 900. We'll go border T, large border L. We'll do the same thing for this one. Yeah, maybe the layout would be easier with grid. I find building simple grids is actually really easy with Flexbox. I think the power of grid is when you're doing fancy stuff using the min-max function or like complex grid template areas. And that's kind of why I've been hesitant to add CSS grid functionality to Tailwind, because I feel like most of the power of CSS grid is lost when you're just trying to do utilities. Like if you're just trying to mimic a Flexbox grid with CSS grid, it's kind of like CSS, you're not even getting the real full power of CSS grid. You're just doing something that you could already do. But yeah, it's still cool. I'm still going to add it to Tailwind soon. I just need to play with the API a bit more. All right, so now we've got kind of our borders in place, which is pretty cool. It's kind of cool that this synchronizes like the filters across windows, at least sometimes, depending on which one I'm working on anyways. Seems like not super, doesn't seem to always work. Seems like it sometimes works. What about if I refresh? Sometimes it works. Be cool if that always worked. I'm sure it's something that he's working on, but it's so far a pretty cool tool. All right, so I think I'm pretty good with like this as a layout. Are we missing like any important elements? Not really. So I think that's good. Anyone know what that view app thing is? I'm not sure what your question is, but this is a view CLI app that we're building everything in, just so we have the ability to do interactive stuff and extract components and stuff. All right, let's get this sidebar thing going. That's where things are going to get pretty interesting, and I think that's probably the part that people are the most excited about. All right, so I'm not even sure how we're going to do this, so it's going to get interesting. So let's start by just like trying to get this sidebar over here and this content area over here without making any changes to the header. All right. So let's go to app.view. So we've got site header, we got search filters, and then we've got our main area. So here we've got min H screen, so that's good. I'm going to wrap all this stuff in a div, search filters and main, because we kind of need to be able to treat this as a group. And now hopefully that changes nothing. Yeah, everything still looks the same across everywhere else. This is definitely a place where this polypane app is useful because we can quickly double check that we're not breaking anything on other breakpoints. Now, in order to get this search filters thing off to the left, we're going to want this to be display flex, but we only want it to be flex on extra large screens. So let's set this to flex. All right, so we're getting part of the way there, right? You can see we've got two sections. Now we want the sidebar to fill the screen, and we also kind of need it to be like a fixed-ish width. So Steve's got it set to like 296 wide, which is kind of like an arbitrary number, but if we look at the Tailwind docs, we can try and find something that's close. So like 20 rem is 320 wide. And then I think we have like a width 64 utility, which is 16 rem, which is 256. So what we might want is 18 rem, which would be 288. And what did we say Steve had for this width? 296. So 288 might be good enough for our purposes, and it's not like drastically outside of Tailwind's design system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new spacing value here of, let's see, what would that be? 18 rem times 4, 72. So Tailwind's default spacing system goes up to 64, right? There's like 56, 48, there's 48, 56, 64, then a bunch of smaller ones. So all we're really doing here is extending the spacing scale up a bit, following a similar sort of pattern. So we're going up to 72 and then up to 80. So 72 is going to be 18 rem, and 80 is going to be 20 rem. View CLI is just a tool for creating view apps. That's all. It's a view app, but View CLI is a command line tool that lets you go view, create my app, and it scaffolds out a view app for you. You can just Google it and it'll explain it all. All right. Okay, so let's give this sidebar a width. So search filters. Trying to make a decision here about where we want to hold this width value, because like this search thing needs to sort of know about all of its, how it should react on different breakpoints already. So I think I'm pretty comfortable just saying width 72 right here. And then Yeah, okay, so there we go. So that changed. So now we've got the width. Now it's not taking up the full height of the screen, which is probably something that we want. So let's figure that out. So the only way to really get this to fill up the full height of the screen is using Flexbox. Basically what we need to do is we need to make the whole app a flex container in the column direction so that we can make the second column fill up the space. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say on XL screens, make this flex in the column direction. And then we also want this to fill the remaining space. All right, so now it's full height. Now we also want to make sure this header never shrinks. So let's just do that here. We'll do XL flex shrink 0. We're not going to see any consequences of that currently, but if we added more and more content here, you would see like it might try to crunch the header, which is not ideal. So we'll just add that there and then we'll be in good shape. Okay, so if we scroll back, you can see like none of these changes have affected any of the other layouts, right? Like everything is still perfectly fine on those screens. Now this is interesting. We've got this overflowing. So let's make sure that we solve that. So what did we do? We made this a flex container. So for main, we're going to want to make sure that this can shrink as needed. And with any luck, that'll solve that problem. Yeah, no, it doesn't. Okay, no problem, no problem. Let's think. We might have to tinker with that a bit. I think these overflowing images are going to be the death of us in this particular situation. But we might be able to figure it out. Like we might actually just need to go XL overflow X hidden. Now please tell me that just this area scrolls. Oh, nothing scrolls there now. All right. Things are going to get interesting with this. What if we do it on this element? It's always, you never really know. Okay, yeah. So just trial and error, figuring out where should we hide the overflow. Overflow has proven itself to be like the most mystifying element of CSS in my later CSS years, especially combined with Flexbox and like intentional overflow scrolling behavior. Trying to figure out exactly how to craft what should be hidden, what should not be hidden to actually get the browser to do what you want is a challenge, to say the least. But we're getting pretty close with this layout here. So the next thing is I think like we want to hide the search and filters stuff. Basically, that stuff should not be should not exist at all on this view because it's just going to be shown permanently. The search has to move up to the top, but I don't think we're going to be able to do that with just CSS. I think we're actually going to need like two search boxes, one that lives in the filter menu, then one that lives in the header that's conditionally visible when we're at a certain breakpoint. Okay, so let's start by hiding that stuff. So we have a div for that already. So we can just basically pretty easily just say XL hidden here. And that should go away. Now, where did we implement our border? This makes me regret one thing that we implemented. Although actually no, because I don't know if you remember, we debated at one point, like, should this border be a bottom border on this element or a top border on this element? Ultimately, we decided to make it a top border on this element because we didn't want there to be a bottom border when the filters was closed. Now, for this layout, it would almost have been nicer if it was a bottom border so that when we hide the element, the border goes away because there's like a border up here that you can't see. But maybe the better solution to that problem is just to conditionally hide this border on this screen. So we can just say border 0 or border T0. Kind of be explicit. And that border disappeared there. It kind of looks like we have a little white border there, but we don't, I'm sure, when we actually scroll in. Yeah, so it's a 1 pixel taller. Now we got to stack everything here, right? So here where we have LG Flex, we're just going to want to go XL block, push everything back down. All these widths are messed up. So here where we have LG 1/3, I think we can probably find all three of those. And we'll select the whole thing, go to the end, XL width full. Make sure that we kind of got all that right. Yeah, so that's getting pretty close. Stacked. These should be stacked now. So we'll jump down here to the amenities table. And I guess like we could really just add width full to these. We can still leave it a flex container. There's no real harm in that. So we'll just do LG XL W full. And now we're stacked. This update results button, I think we want to go back to like the wide centered button. I think that'll look cool. That's what Steve has in the design. So all we need to do there is on XL screens, we just want to go back to block W full. I don't think positioning the search would be possible even with CSS grid. That would be like a weird subgrid thing because we actually have to move it from inside this container to inside that container. It's not like we're actually moving one of the grid areas. Maybe I'm wrong though. It'd be cool if I was. Okay, so one other thing to consider is I think what we want with this button is we want it to be fixed to the bottom. So if you're on a really tall browser, we want this always at the bottom. So let's figure out how we can do that. So here where we have this form that has this at the bottom, I think all we need to do is on XL screens, make it display flex in the column direction, and then use justify between. And did it do it? No. Okay. I was wrong. That's okay. XL. Okay, the problem is because this element isn't full height. So now we have to do a little bit of a dance here to make this element match the height of this element. One thing I'm curious about is if we just say height 100%, is that enough? It is enough. Now, is it enough across all browsers? Hard to say. We can test it though. Let's just try doing that solution and see if it works cross browser. So we'll do XL H full. And yeah, there we go. So now if we made this really short, you can see we have to scroll the whole page to get the sidebar into view. I think it would be neat if we could have just this area become scrollable and keep the button like permanently fixed at the bottom. So this is where things are going to get more interesting and challenging. So we're going to have to think through how to actually pull this off. So my first thought is we need to sort of have a max height on this. Okay, this is what I think. I think we need to go to the app and we have to say on extra large screens, we actually want the height to be the viewport height, not the min height. So we don't want it to be possible for things to extend past it. So that's why you'll see like this is cut off here. And then for the search filters area, I think if we, let's open up DevTools for a second. I kind of want to see what's the computed height of this form. 760. So that's tall. Okay, so let's try, what did we do for, okay, we put overflow on this element. Okay, so let's for a second just add XL overflow Y hidden. Does that change the height? Okay. Okay. So now if we take this element and we add XL overflow Y auto. Yeah, look at that. All right, so what did we do? We added XL overflow Y hidden to the container that wraps this. XL overflow Y hidden. And then on the form, or the element, which element was it? The element inside the form. Overflow Y auto. CSS, man, what a rush. Okay, so that's good. This scrolls. As it gets bigger, it just stays at the bottom, which is cool. We can shrink it up pretty small here. No one's ever going to do this, but it still seems to like kind of work. No one's ever going to make their browser window 100 pixels tall, so I don't think we have to solve for that case. But this seems to work. Now, what I do find interesting actually is like when we have vertical scrolling here, I don't really know what's being scrolled. I don't know if that's the body or if it's this div. If it's the body, that's actually nice because that's actually the behavior that I would want. Maybe like real Chrome will be a little bit easier to deduce that from. So if we go up to this view and we shrink this down, get out of here, doc. Yeah, it's not the body because the up and down arrows don't work. That's always something that I found annoying about building these complex like Flexbox layouts with multiple scrolling areas is it's very easy to break the keyboard up and down not working, like on first page load. You have to kind of click the element that you want to be able to scroll. But for our purposes, like I think I'm actually not too upset about that. I think that's fine. It's meant to be like kind of a sophisticated application anyways. All right, so that's actually pretty sweet. Like we got kind of that whole thing working in a reasonable way. So there's a few other things that we can hack on, right? Like one is to kind of get this this area kind of working. One thing that's a little bit of a bummer about having to zoom is you get like pixel rounding issues and stuff, but that's okay. This is still a nice app because like I can shrink the polypane window, but the actual breakpoint windows don't change. So I can still look at this at like 100% size, even though I have the window itself shrunk. So that's pretty sweet. So why don't we see if we can get the this logo centered, get kind of our white section and stuff like that. See what happens. Site header. So what we're going to do, I think, is take this element that has the SVG and how are we hiding this button? Are we hiding just the button? I feel like we can hide this whole div. So where we have small hidden here, I'm going to move that up to this div and just see, does that affect anything? No. So like we just hid the button sort of naively. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this container that contains normally the logo and the button, on extra large screens, we're going to give it a width of 72 so that it matches the width of the sidebar. And on extra large screens, we're going to say that the sidebar should have a background of white. But we're going to have this element have a background of gray 900. So now we have that kind of like corner meeting sort of look. So let's center this logo. So where we have justify between here, I mean, all we really need to do is say XL justify center. Yeah, now the logo's centered. And then we can style like some of this text stuff. So Steve has this set to what color? Gray 900. So we'll just find these links, which I believe are here. So we'll just do this. We'll say XL text gray 900. And it looks like he's using a lighter border around the image when the image is on a light background too. Like if you look here, that's much lighter of a border. Let's see if we can actually find the element. It's probably this. Is it this? No. Is it this? It's this. 300. Okay, so here we've got the image. It's got border gray 600, so we're going to want to say XL border gray 300. This is probably like the thing about Tailwind that I find the most powerful is the responsive design stuff, because coming from like Bootstrap or anywhere else, certain things you could do responsively right in the HTML, right? Like you could say call SM6, call MD4, whatever. And I think Bootstrap even has responsive versions of their spacing helpers and stuff now. But what I find is that in practice, when you're actually building an app, you have to do like responsive versions of like literally everything. Like here I'm changing the border color responsively. Yeah, we could try use just transparency, but the problem is if we just used a transparent black or whatever, we're not going to get the right gray. It's not going to be actually the gray from our design system. It's going to be just like a semi-transparent black. So you can see if I took this, let's duplicate this and move it over here just so we can kind of compare the two. We'll kind of delete this for a second. I'll just try to remember to undo all this stuff. If we take this ellipse and we just make it a black with a transparency on it, we can never get it to actually be the same color as what's on the left. So here's like similar levels of opacity or similar levels of perceived lightness, but this looks a lot more brown and this looks like a cooler blue. And the only way to get this kind of cool gray is to use a real gray. We can't really rely on transparency to solve that. So I think it's actually, I try to avoid relying on transparency and tricks like that. Normally I find it works better to just like say, this is the color that I want, exactly this color. And it comes from a curated color palette that I've put together, and then everything is kind of gravy. Got this view all button that we could add. We could get like this other search in there too. None of that stuff is like super exciting, really. It looks like we got like a lot more vertical padding actually on the big ass version here. What does Steve have for here? So this is still pretty tight. And then on desktop, he kind of goes bigger. So we can maybe incorporate that into the design. So what did we use to sort of dictate the height? I think we determined it by just determining what is the padding around the logo. So if we went with like PY5, that's going to get fatter all the way across the board, I think. Yeah. And then does Steve have like this image bigger? $32 by $32. Come on. 32 by 32. Ours seems a little bit smaller, but you know what? I think a lot of that too is because the image is not cropped the exact same way. All right. I think that's pretty cool. So I guess question for people. I'm happy to stream for like another 15 minutes or so. Looking at the design here, what is the most interesting piece to you in terms of things we haven't done yet? So options would be basically re-implementing the search and including it up here conditionally. One would be adding the view all button. Another one could be like adding this extra row of images, although that's basically just cloning that, but it would be a way to flesh out the rest of the UI. What else is here? There's not really anything left, honestly. I got to build out this piece at some point, but maybe we can do that on the next stream. Won't take long. Yeah, I don't know. More Vue.js. So there's not really any more Vue.js stuff to do. But yeah, okay. Let's just flesh out the search. Maybe we'll have time to add the view all button as well. So all I'm going to do for this search is I'm going to find the search that we hid, which is in the search filters. And that's this element. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go over to the site header. And here in the nav, I'm going to add a div. I'm going to paste this in. We're just going to see where it shows up. It shows up way over here. That's not really what we want. Why is it showing up over there, I wonder? Oh, okay. So it's because this nav is not full width. So we're going to say XL flex 1 so that this nav fills up all the space. And then we're going to say XL justify between so that it pushes all of its contents around. And that's not going to be perfect because it's going to keep these links here. So probably what we actually want to do here is wrap this in another div. The old double div move. And then we're going to want to probably move over some classes. So let's just start by adding these classes, the exact same ones, and figure out what we can delete. So we don't want justify between. We don't want flex 1, like that just doesn't matter. px4 we don't need because that's going to be on the parent. Flex item center we probably do need. So let's check that out. Okay, so things are broken over here, so we'll figure this out too. Let's open up this menu. Things are actually surprisingly okay here. We're going to want to get rid of the search, but that's no big deal. So where do we see that things were mostly broken? Here, and this is actually only really because the search is there. So let's just add a class here. We'll say XL block, otherwise hidden by default. And when we're at the block view, we're going to want to style this correctly. So it's probably not going to be that complicated. Looks like we got a border of gray 300 and text of 200. So what color is this icon? Whoops. That's not from Tailwind's design system, Steve, or is it 600, I guess? All right, so we'll go text gray 600, which looks like it already is. The background color is going to be gray 300, I think, or was it 200? And the border was going to be gray 300. And the text color is probably going to be gray 900. Just kind of see what we get. Yeah, I mean, there's a little search. Now, we could probably make it wider if we wanted to. Since we got a little bit more room here. So instead of max with XS, maybe we'll go like SM. Or maybe what we're seeing here is like some flexbox behavior that's not allowing us to actually assign the width that we want. Let's just move this stuff out and we'll add hidden XL block. I guess we can just do this all on XL just to be clear what's happening. So XS is the size probably that we wanted. Yeah. Now on focus, that kind of becomes really hard to read. So let's change that. Maybe we'll do focus BG white is probably okay. We don't need to change the text color, but maybe we'll change the border color. Maybe we'll go like border gray 700 or something like that. What am I missing here? Oh, we have no border. Okay, so let's give it a border by default. Let's say border transparent. Changes the dimensions a little bit, but not in sort of a perceivable way. And then we can do like border gray, like 300 maybe, or 400. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. Cool. Okay, so that's probably good. Eric says he would like to see some more view stuff in terms of componentization. So that's actually a pretty good topic. Probably I would start with these cards. And it really kind of depends on what we're going to put in them in terms of data, right? But maybe we can kind of like quickly make a component for that. So we don't really need to see anything to do that. So I'm just going to make a component here. And I guess we'll call it like property card. It's going to have some props. It won't have any data or methods, but we will have some props for a bunch of the data inside of it. So let's grab a property card here, which is basically this beast. Copy that, slam it in here, get rid of the v4, and this class 2. So I'll just grab all this stuff. And actually, we might want to, I'm going to copy all this. And we'll start by just, I think we're going to want to have a wrapper div for each property card just for our own sanity. So let's import property card. And delete all this. But we'll use this information for this div. And then on the property card, we'll just get rid of all these classes and just test to see if this breaks anything. But that really, all that information really feels like information that's contextual, like what we want the width to be, whether we want to make sure it can shrink, whether we want there to be margins. This is all really only related to the fact that it's in the right place. Why don't you use the XL for the search? I'm not sure what you mean by that question. If you can clarify, I can answer it. Okay, so this still works, right? So probably we would want to have some props for this. Probably some stuff. I mean, probably in a real app, we would just be passing through like the property, you know? So why don't we do that? We can just say like property is property. And why don't we say like for property I in properties, and we'll just create like some property data. We'll just imagine that we got this from an API or something like that. So we're going to have a function that returns some stuff, and we're going to have properties, and it's going to be an array. And each property is going to have some data. So we're going to have things like the image URL. So we'll just say like image URL. We'll grab this from Unsplash. And now we can like kind of make this dynamic too, which would be kind of nice. We can drop in some different property information. So we can say like beds, I think we have like 3 in baths too. Okay, so your question about the search stuff is basically why don't we have XL on all of these things? Because the whole search is only displayed at the XL size. I think that would just be a little silly because we actually want the search to look the same at any size. It's really just a question of we only want it to be displayed at a certain size. So to me, that would just be like a bunch of noise for no reason. Like you can imagine if this search was a component, right? We had like a search bar or something. We wouldn't be like encoding a bunch of responsive stuff in there. All we would really be concerned about is the stuff at the parent level that sort of controls the container that it lives in. If that makes sense. Okay, so we have kind of like the title, I guess, which is Modern Home and City Center. We have the price, which maybe we'll do that in cents or something so that we can be super pro. We can just format that in some fancy way. We can say like review count is 34. And we could do this like star rating sort of dynamically too. Let's just say like rating 4. We'll just say everything can only have a fixed rating of 1 through 5. And we just kind of assume that that's data we would compute on the server. So now we just need to like accept all these props, right? So we'll just kind of grab this, paste it in here. We're not going to do anything fancy with prop types or anything. We'll just kind of do this the simple way. So we'll just grab all this stuff. And we might have some computed values and stuff. Let's see, have we broken everything? Okay, so there's just one property right now. So let's just clone this to 4 properties. 2, 3, 4. Oh, interesting that something weird's going on with the padding. Oh, property, object. Why is the ML4 only here and here? Oh, I know why. Because we say greater than 1, because when you do like the IN4 thing with view, it's 1 based, but when you're actually iterating over an array, it's 0 based. Oh, what am I? I'm stupid. This is just one prop called property. That explains that other problem. All right. So let me just kind of run through this and make some stuff dynamic, right? So nothing really to it in terms of the actual, we're not learning much about Tailwind or UI here, which is fine, but it's just like some basic view stuff. So here we'd have like property.beds, and we might want to use like some pluralization library or something to make sure that we're using the right plurals and stuff like that. We could really just have, we could do that pretty dynamically here too. We could say property.beds greater than or does not triple equal 1. Then beds, or if it's 1, then beds, otherwise beds. We can do the same thing for baths. See if that's still working. And then we can do our property title. And then this is going to be interesting. So maybe we'll have like a computed property for that. Like price, like formatted price or something. I can never remember how to do this. JavaScript format money. There's a quick way to do this. Number.prototype.toFixed. Okay, so this will just be this.property.toFixed 2, and we want to multiply it by 100. This.property.price times 100 .toFixed 2, and that's not going to add the comma. Seriously, this isn't the... Yeah, this is what I want. I think. Yeah, that seems fine. This.property.price. Do you follow the line length guide on a PSR2? No, I don't. No, I didn't fart, although that would be funny. All right, so we'll just do formatted price here. Let's just see if that worked. Whew. Divided by 100. There we go. And then we got like our number of reviews. And now let's just maybe, before we do the actual star stuff, just like maybe manipulate some of these things a little bit so we can be certain that that we're seeing different values. Whatever, that'll be enough. Yeah, so the values appear to be dynamic like we want. So let's do the stars. This could be kind of like a fun little challenge to try and do it in like the kind of the cleanest way possible. So yeah, I'm already like thinking in my head what's like a really clever way to do it. I guess like the if we just wanted to do like the most naive way possible, this is what I would do. I would just get rid of that and do like a dynamic class binding. And basically we want to say property dot, what do we call it? Rating. Rating greater than or equal to pastry. If it's greater than or equal to that, then yep. Just doing a live stream. Text, what do we have? Text teal 500. Otherwise, we need like text gray 400 or something. This should work, although it's kind of like a, I feel like we could come up with something more clever. Yeah. So that'll work. Yeah, and then we can just iterate on this, right? So now we could switch this to like a v4 equals I in 5. And then we can just do I. And now that should give us the same thing. Yeah, so that actually feels fine. I like that as a solution. Maybe we'll bring this SVG path down to a separate line just to make things feel a little bit more sane. Yeah, so now this is basically like a kind of fully dynamic, and we don't have like a bunch of duplication to worry about. Like, I think something that people do with Tailwind too much, in my opinion, is they worry too much about using like add apply and extracting classes, because when you're creating components with Vue or React or whatever, or even just partials with Blade or whatever, you don't really actually have a bunch of duplication. Like even like the classes on this SVG were only actually defined once in a single place, right? So it ends up not being that beneficial to create classes like star icon or like property description card and stuff like that. This ends up being better in my opinion, because now when you look at like app.view, this is actually really simple in terms of the styling. There's not really any duplication here. There's just kind of like site header. All the styles for that are embedded in the site header. Search filters, all the styles for that exist there. Property card, all the styles are encapsulated there. Yeah, apply is useful for buttons for sure. And we only have one button on this site so far that looks the same, so it hasn't really been that big of a deal. The other place it's useful, and we sort of are doing it, is like for our form controls, like form select and stuff. We're getting those from a library, like the Tailwind plugin for custom forms, but it's still the same sort of principle. We've created a component class to kind of make that stuff a little bit simpler and more reusable. We could extract stuff for like labels, you know what I mean? Like we could have a component for like a form control where maybe it takes the control as a prop or as a slot, so that like this pattern is not duplicated everywhere, and we could kind of control that from one place, because that is like very similar in a lot of places. Like we're doing that same sort of thing here. So even if this was just a class of like a little form label component, right? Like we could just have like a form label price range and keep that stuff baked in. And then in this case where we want to make that a block element, we would just literally add block to it, and Vue would kind of handle all that stuff gracefully. So that'd be kind of cool. One thing that I kind of love about React that you can't do in Vue is sort of have like private components that only exist as like helpers for a bigger component. It'd be nice if I could do that in Vue. Like for this form label thing, I'm kind of like, I don't really want to make a file for it and make it like a first class thing. Like this is what form labels look like in the whole app. I just would like to be able to make like a little form component or form label that's only accessible from this file. That's just like in React, it would literally just be like function form label, and this would just return the JSX for the label, or you know, and then I could just access it in this file. And if I wanted to change the name, I would just need to change it in this file. If I had different form labels in other places, they could still also be called form label because it's just kind of local. I think I could technically do that. I mean, we could try that as like a little experiment. If you just did like components, what does a component have to look like in Vue if you just define a component? Do you actually have to call like view.component, or can you just like provide the object? View.components. Where's like, I guess maybe the better place to look would be the API docs for the components key. Components, a hash of components to be made available to the Vue instance. I think I would just have to test and see. I mean, we could test it really quickly. So say we just had a component called foobar, and it just had like a template of span foobar. And then here we just went foobar. We just dropped in a bunch of those. What happens? Looks like we got 50 console errors. You're using the runtime only build where the compiler is not available. So instead of this, we could have a render function that accepts H and returns a span with an empty object, and then children, which is foobar. Yeah, okay. So we could do it with a render function here, which wouldn't be the end of the world. So if we did just want to have like a little lightweight form label component that was like reusable just in this case, we could just grab one of these and let's figure this out. So we'll just return H span, and then I can never remember. I think you can just do class and then drop this stuff in there. We don't need block though. And then for the children, it's just going to be H. Is it just this dot slots dot default? See if this even compiles. I'm nervous it won't because like the this binding is wrong. Can we clear this? Okay. We're not actually getting any errors, right? Okay, so we have like a little hand-rolled form component there. So if we were to just say form label and get rid of everything except this, do we still get property type showing up properly? So if we check that out now, we can go to like view DevTools. Oh, there is no view DevTools because this isn't Chrome. That makes sense. So if we open up view DevTools here, we should be able to inspect this and see, okay, yeah, we do have a form label component here. Yeah, so I guess this is a way to do kind of what I was talking about that you can do in React, but this is of course just a lot more verbose. It's still pretty good though. I mean, if you had JSX support enabled in Vue, this would actually be like fairly fine. But yeah, most people are not writing render functions in Vue. It's kind of like not a common thing to do, especially just like writing them raw this way, but it's kind of neat. All right, that's probably a good place to wrap up for today. I'm going to commit this code and I'll open source this repo for anyone who wants to tinker around. Please don't open issues or submit pull requests. That's annoying. But check it out if you're interested in it and just want to learn. Other than that, yeah, thanks for checking out the stream, and maybe I'll do a stream on Monday to build out the last kind of piece of this, which was this kind of like simple kind of homepage component. And then probably starting Tuesday, I'm going to get cranking on recording these videos and try and get those recorded over the next week or two and get this course out at the beginning of July. The city should also be in the data array. Yeah, the city probably should be in the array. Like probably what I would do is instead of just having properties, we'd actually abstract away this whole section to be like featured locations or something. And yeah, I've come back from the API kind of organized that way, but yeah, a project for another day. Anyways, hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for checking it out, and hope you learned a thing or two, and I'll catch you next week. Thanks, everyone.